The cool autumn breeze enveloped me as soon as I got out of the car, bringing with it the characteristic smell of dry leaves and a faint touch of humidity that felt so familiar. Oxford, my hometown, seemed a shadow of what I remembered. The streets, once filled with laughter and adventures, were now wrapped in a heavy silence, as if the city were mourning the loss that we all felt. With a deep sigh, I headed toward my grandmother's house, where the family was already gathering. As I opened the rusty gate, a wave of nostalgia hit me. The house still had the same cozy look, with flowers in the garden blooming haphazardly. But something was different. The air was heavy with sadness, and I felt like an intruder amidst that pain. Upon entering, I was met with tight hugs and melancholic glances, but I couldn't connect. "Mariana, dear, you look so different," my aunt commented, her gaze drifting off me. "Life in London must have changed you." "Yeah, I'm just trying to adjust again," I replied, attempting to force a smile. But the words came out emotionless, as if I were speaking about someone else, not myself. The living room was filled with photos of my grandmother, smiles frozen in frames that could not hide the sadness now dominating that space. My heart ached at the sight of a photo of her from a distant summer, wearing a straw hat and a radiant smile. I remembered the stories she used to tell, the nights I would lie beside her listening to her memories. "How could you leave like this, Grandma?" I thought, feeling a wave of guilt for not having visited her more often. As I tried to cope with my feelings, I heard my father calling everyone to the living room. "It's time to talk about Grandma." I felt a knot form in my throat. What could be said that I didn't already know? The pain of loss was shared, but I was so absorbed in my own thoughts that I could barely hear the murmurs around me. After a while, the funeral ceremony began. The sky was overcast, as if reflecting the sadness we all felt. I felt as if I were watching everything from the outside, like a spectator to a tragedy, with my heart heavy. When the coffin was lowered into the ground, tears streamed down my face, but I couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. He should be here, by my side, comforting me. As the funeral ended, I saw Daniel approaching. He had a worried look, and his embrace brought me some relief. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he murmured, his tone soft like a balm. "I'm here for you." "Thank you, Daniel. That means a lot to me," I replied, trying to anchor myself in his presence. But as I looked into his eyes, a restlessness began to stir within me. Was it the pain of loss or something deeper that I wasn't ready to face yet? After the funeral, we went back to my grandmother's house, where memories piled up in every corner. The atmosphere was heavy, and the sadness seemed to intensify as each family member shared stories. I felt out of place, as if I were stuck between the past and the present. "Mariana, do you remember that time your grandmother made that chocolate cake for your birthday?" my aunt asked, trying to break the silence. "She was so happy to see you smile." "Yes, I remember. She always said that chocolate had magical powers," I replied, trying to engage in the conversation. But while everyone laughed and shared memories, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more. Something hidden beneath the surface of that pain. Later, as the family dispersed, I decided to explore the house. The walls seemed to whisper secrets of the past, and I needed to know more. Entering my grandmother's room, a mix of emotions flooded over me. Things were the same, but there was a dusty box at the back of the closet. With an impulse, I went over and opened it. Inside, I found old photos revealing moments from my childhood, but among them, a yellowed letter caught my attention. What else could my grandmother have hidden? My grandmother's house felt even emptier now, as if every corner was infused with memories that refused to fade. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust particles floating in the air, as if they danced to the sound of a sad music that only I could hear. As I surveyed the room, a sense of discomfort began to rise within me. I needed to understand more about her past, but the idea of talking to my mother about it made me nervous. "Mariana, are you okay?" Her voice pulled me from my thoughts. My mother stood in the doorway, a worried expression on her face. "I'm fine, just reflecting," I replied, trying to hide the agitation consuming me. Can we talk about Grandma? There are things that I would like to know. She hesitated, taking a step back as if preparing to retreat from a minefield. Now is not the time, dear. It's all too fresh. Let's let the good memories prevail. But what about the bad memories? And the secrets? It's not fair that I don't know. I insisted, the frustration beginning to show in my voice. She was my grandmother, and I feel like part of her left without me really knowing her. Mariana, you don't understand. Some things are better left in the past, my mother said, her voice tense, her eyes avoiding mine. Her defensive posture was a clear sign that there was something there she didn't want to discuss. I want to understand. If there's something I need to know, I can't just ignore it. What are you hiding? The last sentence came out louder than I intended, but the truth was that the tension was suffocating me. I'm not hiding anything, she replied, but the hesitation in her voice said otherwise. I just don't want you to get hurt. Mom, I'm already hurt. It's not just the loss of Grandma. It's everything. It's this feeling that there's something dark hanging over our family, and I need to know what it is. My words echoed in the room, and the silence that followed was heavy. Sometimes love manifests in strange ways, she murmured, almost to herself.
What do you mean by that?
I asked, curiosity mingling with confusion. The expression on her face was one of pain, and somehow I knew we were beginning to touch on something deep. I just don't want you to repeat the mistakes of the past, she said, her voice trembling. Your grandmother, she had her flaws. And I don't want you to feel trapped by them. Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. What do you mean? What kind of flaws? Mariana, please. I can't talk about this right now, she said, turning to leave. But I was already determined not to let this go. Something was very wrong, and I needed to find out. The conversation with my mother replayed in my mind as I tried to relax later, but my thoughts kept spinning. Daniel noticed that I was distant during dinner. He watched me with a mix of concern and compassion, and I felt guilty for not being able to open my heart. Mariana, you seem lost, he commented, as I fiddled with my food without really eating. Do you want to talk about what's bothering you? I don't know if I can, Daniel. I confessed, my voice wavering. Everything is so confusing. I feel like I'm being pulled to a place I don't want to go. Maybe you should consider seeing a therapist, he suggested, with a calmness that both irritated and comforted me. Talking to someone might help. I don't know if that will change anything, I murmured, looking out the window. The night was dark, and I felt adrift in the shadows. What if it just brings more pain? Sometimes, facing the pain is the only way to move forward, he said gently. I'm here for you, Mariana. You don't have to face this alone. I wanted to believe him, but the truth was there was something inside me that refused to open up. I felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode. The weight of the past was crushing me, and I didn't know how to deal with it. That night, as I tried to sleep, the shadows of my mind began to stir. I found myself in the midst of a nightmare, figures from the past emerging, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. My grandmother's voice echoed, and I could see her, but I couldn't reach her. I felt trapped in a labyrinth with no way out, and the anguish grew with each passing moment. I woke up in a panic, my heart racing and cold sweat trickling down my forehead. I knew I had to face my fears, but the thought of confronting the truth was terrifying. What would I find? What else was hidden in the shadows of my past? One thing was certain, I couldn't live in uncertainty any longer. I was nervous as I entered the therapist's office. The walls were a soft shade of blue, and there was a shelf filled with books that seemed to carry stories as heavy as the ones I bore in my chest. I sat in a comfortable armchair, but the feeling of comfort quickly dissipated, giving way to palpable anxiety. The therapist, a woman with gray hair and a gentle gaze, greeted me with a warm smile. Hi, Mariana. How are you feeling today? She asked, her soft voice seeming to have the power to calm my inner turmoil. I don't know. I just know I need to talk about my grandmother, I replied, feeling that the words were a weight I needed to unload. She passed away recently, and I'm going through a whirlwind of emotions. I understand. The loss of a loved one can bring up many memories and feelings. What would you like to share about your grandmother? I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. When I was a child, I spent a lot of time with her. She was my confidant, my refuge. But now, I feel like there are secrets she took with her. The therapist watched me attentively. Secrets can be very heavy, Mariana. Do you feel these secrets are connected to your own story? Yes, I feel like there's a pattern of betrayals in my family, I confessed, looking down at the floor. I can't stop thinking about it. My grandmother's life, what she lived through, and it makes me question everything. You mentioned betrayals. What exactly have you discovered? I closed my eyes for a moment, recalling the box of photos I had found. There are stories that were never told, things I don't know. But now I'm starting to realize that maybe her life wasn't so perfect after all. And that scares me, because I don't want that to repeat in my life. Mariana, you have the power to break that cycle. But first, it's important to understand your own emotions and how they are connected to your past. As we talked, I realized that each word I spoke was like a small lamp lighting up the darkness. I really needed to understand these patterns. I needed to face the truths I had always avoided. But the idea of discovering that my grandmother, the woman I had always admired, had a dark side, was painful. After the session, I left the office feeling like a weight had been lifted, but another anguish began to form. The image of my grandmother haunted me, and I needed more than ever to understand who she really was. The next day, I decided to meet a childhood friend, Clara. She always had a way of seeing the world that intrigued me, and maybe she could give me some clue about my grandmother's hidden life. When I found her at a cafe, her warm smile brought a bit of light to my gray day. Mariana, it's been a while. How are you coping with everything? She asked, her voice full of empathy. I'm trying, but I discovered some things about my grandmother that left me confused. Do you remember her? Do you know anything I don't? Clara hesitated, as if weighing her words. Well, your grandmother was a strong woman, but there were rumors, you know? Some people said she had an affair with a married man. But that's just what I heard. I was never sure if it was true. My heart raced. An affair? With whom? I don't know his name, but I always heard that she met him in secret. People in town talked about it. I never believed it, but now that you mention it, maybe there was some truth to it. I was in shock. The idea that my grandmother had been involved in a betrayal left me reeling. It changed everything I thought about her, about love and loyalty. Does this mean that I could be following the same path? That maybe betrayal is something inherent in our family? No, Mariana. You have the power to change that. You don't have to repeat her story, Clara replied, trying to comfort me. But the truth was there, laid bare before me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that betrayal might be closer than I imagined. With each passing day, more and more secrets seemed to reveal themselves, and I felt increasingly lost. When I returned home, worry consumed me. Daniel was there, and I wanted to tell him what I had discovered, but the truth felt like a weight I wasn't ready to share. He approached me, trying to comfort me, but I pulled away, as if fleeing from something that was chasing me. Mariana, what's going on? You seem distant, he said, his voice revealing concern. I need some time alone. He frowned, frustration evident. I'm here to help you. You know that, don't you? I know, but I can't talk about it right now. The truth was consuming me, and I didn't know how to deal with it. With each passing moment, the feeling that I was about to lose everything left me more anxious. I needed to face my demons, but the thought of sharing this burden with Daniel felt impossible. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky a deep orange as I slowly walked through the cemetery. The air was heavy, laden with memories and emotions I still hadn't managed to process. My grandmother's grave was surrounded by flowers I had placed myself, and a deep pain settled in my chest as I remembered her warm laughter and the advice she always gave me. As I approached, I noticed something I had forgotten, a small, rusty metal box, partially buried in the ground. With trembling hands, I managed to unearth it. My heart raced as I opened it. Inside, I found a yellowed letter, its edges worn, and the handwriting nearly illegible. My hands were sweaty as I tried to decipher what was written. The words seemed to float for a moment until one phrase stood out. If one day I depart, do not let the secrets I hold destroy you. What did that mean? My grandmother had always been a woman of mysteries, but I never thought she had anything to hide that could affect my life. What else didn't I know? A chill ran down my spine. I looked around, as if expecting someone to appear to give me answers. But all I had was the silence of the cemetery and the letter in my hand. I returned home, still fixated on the letter, feeling as if I were in a maze with no exit. When I walked in, I saw Daniel in the living room, chatting animatedly with a woman I didn't recognize. My stomach churned. The way she smiled at him made me uneasy. It wasn't just jealousy. There was something deeper in that exchange. Hey, love. This is Clara, a childhood friend of your grandmother. She was telling us some funny stories from the old days, Daniel said when he noticed me. His voice was warm, but there was something in his gaze that didn't fit. Hi, Mariana, Clara said, with a smile that didn't seem genuine. Daniel has many fond memories of your grandmother. He's very special to her. Those words sounded strange, and suddenly my grandmother's story began to intertwine with Daniel's. What kind of stories? I asked, trying to stay calm, but the tension in my voice was palpable. Oh, stories of love and friendship, Clara replied, avoiding eye contact. You know how full of life she was. Her tone was laden with an undertone I couldn't grasp, but it made me uneasy. And you knew her well? My voice came out harsher than I intended. The unease in my chest transformed into distrust. Why was Daniel talking to her? What else did he know that I didn't? Yes, I did. She was like a grandmother to me, always full of stories. Clara seemed nervous now, and that only heightened my discomfort. I needed to understand what was happening.
Right.
I need a minute, I said, interrupting the conversation. I went to my room, where the letter still lingered in my mind. What else could my grandmother have hidden? And what did that mean for me and Daniel? Anger started to boil inside me, not just because of their conversation, but because of the unspoken truths that seemed to accumulate at every corner of my life. After a few minutes, I couldn't hold it in any longer. The anger transformed into an urgent need to confront him. I went back to the living room and found him alone. Clara had left. Daniel, we need to talk, I started, my voice almost failing me. Sure, what happened? He turned to me, a worried expression on his face. I found a letter from my grandmother, and I saw you talking to Clara. What else do you know about her? What else haven't you told me? The words spilled out in one breath, like a confession I had kept inside for too long. Mariana, I don't understand what this has to do with. It has everything to do with it. I interrupted. I feel like there are things you're not telling me. Secrets that are surrounding us, and I don't know if I can trust you. His expression shifted. He looked confused, and a shadow of pain crossed his face. I never wanted to hide anything from you. I was just trying to help. Clara knows many things about your grandmother, and I thought you'd like to hear them. Hear them? Hear what exactly? What story does she have to tell that could change everything? Frustration overflowed within me. Mariana, I just wanted you to have someone to talk to. I worry about you, Daniel said, his voice low and calm, but the tension in the room was palpable. So, you care so much that you don't tell me what's going on? What else are you hiding? The words came out like an explosion, and I knew I needed to stop, but I couldn't. He sighed, his expression becoming more serious. I'm not hiding anything, but if you keep this up, maybe it's better if we take a break. That hit me like a punch to the stomach. Despair began to mix with anger. I didn't want to lose Daniel, but I didn't know how to deal with all of this. What I really wanted were answers, and at that moment, it felt like more questions were rising while the truth I feared drew closer. The heavy air in the room felt suffocating. I stood there, arms crossed, staring at Daniel, who looked as confused as I felt. He had just told me that the woman he was talking to was a distant cousin, someone who had also come across the dark secrets of my family. Mariana, please believe me. There's nothing between us, he pleaded, his eyes full of sincerity, but what I felt was a mix of anger and distrust. How can I believe you, Daniel? My voice came out louder than I intended. After everything that's happened? You and this woman. What were you discussing? What secrets does she know that you haven't told me? The feeling of betrayal spread in my chest like an uncontrollable flame. I didn't know she was in Oxford until I ran into her. We were just talking about family, about your grandmother, and the things she left behind, he said, trying to remain calm. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how. I didn't want to hurt you. Hurt? You think it doesn't hurt me to see you talking to someone who might know more than I do about my own family? I could feel the pressure in my eyes, the desire to cry, but also to scream. All this time, I've been trying to deal with the loss of my grandmother and the secrets that surround my life. E agora, você me traz mais perguntas. He stepped closer, his hand raised as if he wanted to touch my face, but I recoiled. Mariana, I'm here for you. I always will be. We'll face this together. I promise there are no more secrets between us, he said, his voice soft, but I was already in a dark place where I couldn't hear his promises. The decision was taking shape in my mind. I needed space to think. I can't do this right now, Daniel. I need time. Time for myself, I uttered, the words coming out as a desperate whisper. He looked so lost, so desolate. I'm going to step away for a while. I left the house without looking back. The streets of Oxford felt strange and distant. I needed the truth, to find answers, even if it meant facing demons I'd rather leave buried. I wandered aimlessly, my thoughts tangled, and ended up at the city library, a place that had always brought me comfort when I was younger. The shelves, filled with dusty books, seemed to hold secrets I was desperate to uncover. As I flipped through some works, my mind drifted to the past. I remembered my grandmother, her stories of love and betrayal, and how she always insisted that the truth was a burden one shouldn't carry alone. If you don't face your fears, Mariana, they will consume you, she used to say. Now, those words echoed in my mind like a grim reminder. After a few hours, I decided to visit my grandmother's house again. The box of photos was still there, waiting for me. When I opened it, the smell of aged paper enveloped me. The images were a portal to simpler times, but they also brought painful questions. A portrait of my young grandmother, smiling with a man I didn't recognize, stood out. Her expression was one of joy, but there was something in her eyes that seemed to hide a deep secret. Who was he? I murmured to myself. The weight of uncertainty began to oppress me. I knelt on the floor, surrounded by those old memories, and my mind started to spin around new possibilities. What else could my grandmother have hidden? And what would this mean for me and Daniel? And then, as if fate was conspiring against me, I decided I needed to confront my mother. That night, gathering my courage, I sat at the kitchen table, where so many conversations had taken place over the years. Mom, I began, my voice trembling. I need to know about Grandma, about who she really was and what happened in the past. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a sadness I didn't understand. Mariana, some truths are hard to bear. Sometimes it's better to leave the past alone. But now I knew I couldn't leave it alone. Please tell me the truth. What else have you hidden from me? The silence that followed was deafening, and I knew something was about to be revealed. She had an affair with Daniel's father, my mother finally said, her voice breaking. The shock hit me like a punch to the stomach. I didn't want you to know, but the truth is that your grandmother's story and our past might be more intertwined than you imagine. Her words echoed in my mind, and reality shattered around me. I didn't know how to deal with it. The truth was a storm, and I was right in the eye of it, unsure how to escape. I felt my heart race, and in a fit of despair, I stood up from the table and ran outside, not knowing where I was going, but certain that I needed to escape that devastating revelation. After days immersed in turbulent thoughts, I finally found Daniel in a cozy cafe, a place we used to frequent during our early dates. The aroma of fresh coffee and the cozy atmosphere couldn't ease the tension I felt in my chest. I saw him sitting at a table in the corner, looking out the window, as if he were waiting for the answers I couldn't find myself. "Hi," I said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from him. Daniel looked up, and the sadness reflected in his eyes cut through my heart. I'm sorry for not reaching out sooner.
I,
I needed time to think. I understand, Mariana, he replied, his voice soft but with a hint of concern. You've been through so much. I just want you to know that I'm here for you. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my courage. Daniel, about everything I discovered about my grandmother, about our families, I don't know how to handle this. I feel like everything is falling apart around me. He watched me closely, as if waiting for me to continue. The truth can be painful, but it can also set us free. What do you want to know? I want to understand why things are this way. Why does betrayal seem to be a pattern in my family? I remembered my mother's words, our conversation before everything fell apart. If my grandmother had an affair and my mother knew, does that mean I'm also destined to repeat those mistakes? Daniel leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. Mariana, you are not your grandmother. And you are not your mother. Each of us has the power to choose our own path. I want you to know that I trust you. I felt a wave of relief wash over me at hearing that. But what about you? What if there's something you haven't told me? What if you're hiding something about your own family? He hesitated, and I realized the fear was still present between us. The only thing I have to hide is how much I care about you. I don't want you to feel like you have to go through this alone. I looked at him, and for the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe we can face this together. We need to talk to our families, expose the truth. I can't live with these secrets anymore. The conversation wasn't easy, but together we decided it was time to confront our pasts. When I got home, anticipation mingled with anxiety. My heart raced as we prepared to meet with my mother. Daniel was by my side, and his presence was the support I needed. Hi, Mom, I said, trying to sound casual, but the tension in the room was palpable. We need to talk. About what, Mariana? She seemed uncomfortable, as if she already knew the conversation wouldn't be simple. About our family, about Grandma, I said, my voice firm. Daniel and I discovered some things you knew and didn't tell me. That's not what you think, she said, trying to look away. Your grandmother did what she thought was right. Right for whom? I questioned, anger beginning to bubble. She had an affair with Daniel's father, and you knew that. And now, what does this mean for us? For me? For our future? She sighed, the weight of years of silence hanging in the air. I didn't want you to know. I wanted you to have a normal childhood, away from the mistakes we made. But you trapped me in a lie. I shouted, frustration turning into tears. You made me believe I had a safe home, when in reality, everything was crumbling. Daniel held my hand, and in that moment, I realized that trust could be rebuilt. Mom, we can't change the past, but we can choose how to deal with it now. Silence is no longer an option. She looked at us, and an expression of despair crossed her face. I'm so sorry, Mariana. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't want you to get hurt. But now it's time for us to be honest, for ourselves and for our family, I asserted, feeling the strength within me grow. We can't live in the shadows anymore. With Daniel's support, I decided that this was not just a moment of confrontation, but the beginning of a new chapter. I was ready to break free from the past, and together, we would finally expose the truth. By letting go of the ghosts that haunted me, I realized I could find peace and love in a future alongside Daniel.